What's up, everyone? I'm Jackie.
And I'm Lindsay,
And we are Women Leaders in Sports Medicine.
here to help you grow your game and own your game.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Women Leaders in Sports Medicine podcast. We have with us today Adena Neglia, who is a registered dietitian at Performance 360, as well as the performance dietitian for the Brooklyn Nets. Adena, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. How are you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing as well as I can, I guess, in quarantine. It's been been an adventure, but it's good.
Yeah. So real quick, we'll just touch on this, but what has this time off been like for you? Have you guys still been able to be in contact with your clients and the players, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first 2 weeks or so, I feel like it was a bit of a whirlwind for everybody. And actually, I was super busy with the team, just kind of situating everybody. And so that aspect was pretty busy. A lot of my clients, private clients at the time, the first 2 weeks kind of took a backseat, which was kind of nice because then I had more time for the busyness of the team. I think because a lot of people were either getting out of the city or just, their lives got turned upside down. So they weren't ready to kind of still work on maybe performance nutrition, or even if it was any other type of nutrition I was seeing them for. So, that was dying down a little bit, but honestly, it's for me, besides having to travel to an office or travel with the team for work, I've been able to stay pretty busy in terms of all my clients kind of came back. I've got some others. Virtual nutrition practice is kind of really getting more popular anyway. So it makes sense to me, but yeah, still staying connected with everybody and, doing what I need to do to support my clients and the players and try to move on like things are, normal.
Yeah. Well, that's good. At least it's good you're still able to, stay in contact with the players, because I know that's not the case for every subset in the field. And also that you had a little bit of time to yourself. It sounds like it's always nice when you're grinding, which we'll definitely get into your story and all that next.
Yeah, it was definitely a little crazy at first, and now we've settled into everything, semi-normal schedule.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was nervous about during the beginning of quarantine, is how people were starting to put things on the backside as far as performance rehab or strength and conditioning or their nutrition. And so when people started coming back, I was so nervous for my athletes, because I was like, what have you done in the last 3 weeks that I have not heard from you? So definitely took a little bit of a acclimatizing period getting them back into it. But I'm glad you're able to stay in contact as well. So kind of getting into meat and potatoes of this podcast, we love to ask the question, what is your why? What brought you into this field from the very beginning?
So I was thinking back to this. I was a competitive figure skater. And, as most people can assume, it's a very aesthetic sport. Mm-hmm. And when I was skating, it was still pretty much old school in terms of training and performance and nutrition. And not that I got a lot of nutrition information from coaching, but you would hear things. I was never the target. I have been privileged. I've always been in a smaller body, but I would hear from a lot of the girls around me, kind of coaches putting them on the double Lutz diet, or, I would overhear a coach talking about, how cutting certain things out for this particular skater, and talking about skaters' bodies when they weren't there. And it really just made me more aware. And I would see over time, as I got older, a lot of these skaters eventually not being able to perform anymore because they had taken this to heart and they developed eating disorders, or just felt so defeated because of their bodies that they couldn't continue in the sport. So I think combination of that, I would hear those messages. And then I come from an Italian family. So we are all about food. Yep. I used to wake up, I just skate before school. So I'd be on the ice at 5:30 in the morning. And my grandfather this older Italian man, he used to box. He would come pick me up 5 a.m, egg sandwich ready to go, orange juice with a straw. And he's like, you have to eat. And it's 5 a.m. And I'm like, oh my God, like
Here's the last thing you're thinking about probably.
Oh my gosh, totally. I like literally just rolled out of bed and I'm like, Grandpa, but I would do it because I was like, all right, he was a boxer. He's, a smart guy. He must know what he's talking about. So it was a combination of me initially just having a really, just loving food and having that be a big part of my life, and eventually kind of becoming more interested in how food affects performance, but also the psychology of all of it and how did it affect people differently? Like these girls that developed eating disorders, what is that all about? And I got really interested in just like that combination of, interests, and it just felt really right to move into the direction of nutrition. So that's what I studied in college, right out of the gate.
That's awesome. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like someone's nutrition, like, they can exercise and they can have rehab and all that sort of thing. But if someone's nutrition isn't on point, like none of that stuff follows suit. And, at the beginning of my career, I was working with a lot of dancers and seeing a lot of, that disordered eating and starting to hear a little bit about like the body dysmorphias and things like that. And recently I've actually randomly started working with a handful of figure skaters. Wow. And seeing that population as well. And it's just like, I think unless you are working with that population, you don't realize that that's also a whole other subset of girls that are having a hard time with that. So I think you being in the middle of it and like experiencing and seeing it firsthand, I think probably allows you to relate with your athlete a lot more, especially if you're working with like the disordered eating side of things. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. And I love that you touched on too, one, not just your love for food, because I can totally appreciate that, but two, there's a whole nother aspect to just eating, right? The psychological component of that, and kind of like what Jackie touched on. And I don't want to make this like a generalization for sports, but like some of the soccer athletes I see and runners I see, it's not necessarily an aesthetic thing. They have this component of a need to burn enough calories. If they're not burning enough calories or hitting their macros or whatnot. So anyway, that's a whole nother tangent we could get into.
Yeah, for sure.
This sounds like a great round table. We need to pull in our like sports psychologists here too as well. But anyway.
Oh, I could talk about it forever. So yes, that is a different topic.
Yeah, stay tuned, everyone. We'll come back to that. But to jump in a little more about you, would you mind telling listeners a little bit more just about your journey and some of the really unique opportunities you've had along the way that have gotten you to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dream job was always private practice. I wanted to see athletes, and I wanted to also dive into that realm of disordered eating because I had experienced it firsthand with these other girls so much. So that was my initial, I just felt like I was really good one-on-one with people, and I had a good understanding of the emotional components with all of this. So it was really exciting for me to be in private practice. And typically that's like end of career, like you build up and you get there, Yeah. But I was just so passionate about it. And for that reason, I always told myself I didn't love the clinical aspect of nutrition and didn't want to be in a hospital. So there was several years, or in the beginning, I was really trying to avoid that going into clinical. So I was still hustling and waitressing on as a side hustle for, just under 5 years ago, trying to make this private practice happen. So, I had graduated grad school and I was applying. I was waitressing throughout grad school. Mm-hmm. So as I was waitressing and applying for jobs, I found this private practice pop up on the listserv from my grad school, and I applied, and it was in the city. I knew I wanted to be in New York City. And it kind of occurred to me, I was like, I looked up online, their website. I'm like, this is kind of prestigious practice. They're probably looking for somebody with more experience. But for some reason, I just submitted my resume and they called me in for an interview. So went in for the first interview. went back home on the train I was from Long Island at the time, and got called in for a second interview. And they brought me there to tell me that they hired me. And they said to me, what you lack in experience, you make up for in other things. So I guess they saw potential, and I'm ever so grateful to my mentors at my private practice at Brown and Adena Nutrition for giving me that opportunity. But I feel like it was kind of like a miracle situation. It was kind of my dream job in New York City at this prestigious private practice, and they were going to give me a chance.
Yeah.
So I was still, again, living on Long Island. The private practice was really, we're going to start feeding you clients. You'll start getting referrals eventually, and you could build this to whatever you want it to be. And I, again, was kind of like holding off on other full-time positions because I wanted this to grow. So I was still waitressing. And then a couple months in, around the same time, actually, I got a job part-time at a long-term care facility. Not one of my favorite places to work, but I was like, okay, I've got the long-term care facility. I could do the private practice. My schedule's working out, and I could still waitress on the weekends. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I was still dreaming about moving to New York City, and a friend of a friend I was chatting with her one day. She had moved to the city, and she was like, listen, this girl that we used to skate with in college is looking for a roommate. I know you want to move. So why don't you just talk to her? Needless to say, very uncharacteristic of me, because I'm such a planner and like need to, just have things in a succession. And I quit both my jobs on Long Island and moved to the city with just this single private practice. And I, for a few months, was freaking out. I was trying not to go back to waitressing. I was so burnt out, and I just had this private practice on the side. And I went out to dinner one night with my girlfriend and her boyfriend, who worked at a financial firm. And I was still looking for like a side gig or, something in nutrition.
Yeah.
And, we're talking over a bottle of wine, like super casual night out. And I'm like, do you need a corporate wellness dietitian at your firm? And he was like, actually, that's like what I'm in charge of. He's like, I'll email you on Monday. So I'm like,
talk about serendipity. Yeah.
Like so casually. He's like, yeah, sure. Why not? And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking, all right, he's a little tipsy, not going to hear from him, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Not giving my hopes up. Monday, he emails me, come in for an interview. I meet the rest of the staff, and I brought my bosses from the private practice on board because I'm like, I freaking have no idea what I'm doing. How am I going to run a corporate wellness account that they're like huge? They have offices in London and China and all over the US. Couldn't do it by myself. So I get hired as the corporate wellness dietitian, and I'm running this whole program. So again, I'm so grateful for my bosses for doing the business side of that, really just letting me take this and run with it and just being there to support me. And I created that whole program, and I was traveling and going to their different office locations, doing my corporate wellness thing. And I absolutely loved it. And end of year, the firm decided to do budget cuts, and they weren't going to keep corporate wellness on the budget anymore. So I was kind of back to square one, but it was really kind of interesting because the week before, I went in for an interview at a restaurant to waitress. And I don't know what made me go and do it. I think I had a little extra free time during the week. So I was like, might as well just pick this up, make a little extra money. So I already had that as backup. Fast forward, I'm waitressing there for a while. Bartender was my friend, and he's like, you're too smart for this. He's like, go find a nutrition job. Like, why are you here? And he had a friend that was a nurse at Mount Sinai that I did not know where she worked. And she always came to the bar after work. And one day he just looked at her. He's like, get her a job. She's a dietitian. Let her work at Sinai. And she's like, yeah, sure. So I'm like, all right, whatever. She's like, send me your resume. So I'm like, okay. Sent her my resume. And that kind of just woke me up a little bit. I was like, maybe I should just, give up this dream of building not give it up, but maybe it just needs to go on the back burner for a bit. And I just do it nights or weekends, and I just get a full-time job. I have health insurance, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I started applying, and I didn't hear from Sinai, but I heard from another long-term care facility. So, I went up and I worked at this long-term care facility for 2 months, quit my waitressing job. So now at this point, I'm private practice. I'm part of the reason, just to backtrack, they hired me at the private practice was my figure skating history, and they really wanted me to be the sports nutritionist there. So that was kind of what I was focusing on among disordered eating and stuff like that. So at this point, I was also consulting for the American Ballet Theater, meeting with their dancers and lecturing. And little, pockets of things in between. But I'm 2 months in at the long-term care facility. And again, long-term care was not my favorite. And I get a call from Sinai like 7 months later, after I put my application in.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, wait, what? And like, I just got this other job, and they're like, we're looking for an ambulatory dietitian. And as I mentioned before, I never loved clinical. Like, I really did not like being inpatient, like it with people that are just like acutely ill, or just, you get quick 15 minutes with them. And I really didn't like that. And this position meant that I would be in charge of 6 outpatient clinics, everything from pediatric hematology oncology to the cardiac clinic for adults. So it was more money. It was outpatient. I could make a little bit more of a difference in talking to them, because I had a little bit more time rather than being inpatient. So, and I just felt like there was more growth. So I took the job, and basically first person ever in this position. I grew up all 6 clinics, got them nice and busy, was seeing clients, learning a ton, and really kind of finally set that baseline for, that clinical experience. More so, not that I didn't have the knowledge to do it, but more the connections with the doctors, connections with other people, things that you do maybe before you start a private practice, you have referrals. So that was kind of nice. And about 1.5 years in, I got an email from one of the dietitians that I worked with, and she said, hey, I was at this health fair. One of the doctors is looking for a sports dietitian. He's opening up this, thing downtown. It's this Performance 360 program. He could tell you more about it. So I called him to see what it was all about. And it was basically this program where we had this team working with athletes or, people high up in corporate that just were looking to enhance performance. And, we'd have a physical therapist, we'd have me, we'd have a trainer, the whole thing. And they would walk through this program, and we would customize for them and just make this like the ultimate treatment for anyone looking to optimize performance. So I was like, okay, this sounds really awesome. This is really more of the direction I want to go. And long story short, I end up taking the job. So I'm there for a few months. We're starting to really build it up and get it together. And one of the doctors I work with had been in contact with some of the guys from the Brooklyn Nets team. And I guess they wound up asking him if he knew a dietitian. He said, hey, I've got one. And the rest is pretty much history. They came in, interviewed me, and I've been with the team ever since. So kind of a lot of twists and turns, very random. Got a little bit of experience in pretty much every aspect of nutrition. But I think the thing that has stayed constant for me is the sports nutrition piece and a lot of the one-on-one counseling.
Yeah. Well, I know our listeners and Jackie and I appreciate you touching on your journey, because I think sometimes coming up in any field, everyone has this vision of this straight shot path. And
I did, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, same. And Jackie's probably like, yeah, me too. But the more people you speak with and you listen to their stories, it's never really the case. I mean, usually, like you said, what stayed constant is, your passion for sports and being a sports dietitian, but you were still able to take opportunities as they presented themselves and really learn from it. And at the end of the day, that landed you into where you are now. I mean, I think it's so cool too, that with almost like each of your next job or next position, it was just kind of like someone you knew and you just asked, you just put yourself out there.
It's so funny. And that's, I think, what I've always, when I was growing up, I would look up all the dietitians I wanted to be. And I would say, hey, can I intern with you? Hey, can I? And a lot of the time they said yes. I mean, I don't know if it's different now. Maybe more people are doing that. But I just was like, who do I want to be? and how do I connect with them? And I guess that's kind of been helpful. It was very like, it was done not without much thought. It was just kind of like my, I don't know, like I had no plan. I was just like, hey, I want to be them. Let me just see if I could follow them around. So
yeah, I think that's huge. Like people are nervous to reach out to people they aspire to be. But like you said, more often than not, they're like, yeah, why not? Like, I got time. You can come hang out. Like, yeah, there's no harm in reaching out. And that's like one of the things we're really trying to create for people is like how, like, just do it. Like, just send an email. Like, what's the worst they're going to say is like, not right now. And you don't know them anyway. So it's not hurting you.
Yeah. For some reason, I just have like a lot of confidence in school. Like, I think now that I know more, I'm a little bit more, but I was just like, hey, I'll be great for like, I don't know. I don't know why, but I don't know if it's not so much the case, but now.
I think something else that probably helped you and what I thought was really cool a little bit about your journey is it felt like at every step you were always like working to create something. And I think that speaks to like the environment you were able to come in, like the people around you were willing to like help foster that. But I think there's so much learning in trying to create something new, right? You're in private practice and then you're like, I'm going to do corporate wellness. Don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it. Right. And then, you know, moving into next step, you were always like creating, which I think is really cool. But kind of moving like all the way back to the beginning of your story, you had mentioned like, yeah, I didn't really feel experienced, but I still went and interviewed and sent in my resume to like a really prestigious dietetic group. And you had mentioned they had said, you know, the things you lack for experience, you made up for in other things. What do you feel like looking back? Like, what are some things that felt like helped you in getting these opportunities as far as like, you know, getting kind of the areas that you maybe weren't so experienced in?
Yeah. So I think part of it, besides having experience as an athlete myself to kind of do the sports nutrition route, I was also pretty savvy. They had wanted me to send some of the things that I had written, like articles and things like that. And they thought that I was pretty insightful with and science-based and all that good stuff, and thought I would be an asset to their blog and their social media. So they wanted me to also kind of they hired me for that piece as well. And I think, you know, they asked me a question about, they get a lot of eating disorders in this practice. Mm-hmm. And they kind of asked me like, what do you know about eating disorders? Or like, are you comfortable if, you know, you have more eating disorder clients? And I think I said something that a lot of people might not like realize about eating disorders that kind of lit up a light bulb for them, possibly. I don't know. But I basically said, well, you know, I understand that it's not just about the food, and there's like more of a psychological component, and there's a lot of care that has to go into this process. And you have to work with a team in order to help these particular individuals. And I think just maybe kind of that insight as to, you know, I don't think a lot of people would have come up with that answer if they didn't have experience in it before. And I think they were looking for someone, not just for the sports, but like, we're going to get a lot of this in our practice. How are you going to handle it? And I think I was just very willing to learn, like very excited to learn. So they felt like they could kind of take me under their wing, and that could have been part of it. I think I was just also so passionate about the position. Like, this was my dream job. Like, I was so excited, and I think maybe they saw that passion and that drive to work.
That's awesome. I think that last point is big too, because like when you're interviewing people and you have one person that just doesn't really come off like they are that passionate, and then the other person comes in and they're like, I'm so excited and I want to do this, you know, like that energy is like you gravitate towards that energy. So I think that's a good piece of almost advice for people who are coming in and interviewing for these positions, as far as new grads or people who are a little bit more green, is like, show your love for it. Like, I think people come in and they feel like they need to be like, I am here and I am serious and I want this job, but like, act like you're excited. I love when people come in and they're really stoked about it. And then the other thing you kind of mentioned is like having that like really early holistic view, which I feel like sometimes people don't have. And that's something that I'm hoping changes, is people's understanding of what everybody else does. Cause that just helps the athlete or your patient, your client a little bit more anyway. And
100%.
Yeah. And something I'm kind of curious and just kind of want to ask you about, and it kind of is a little off tangent, but as far as like rehab world or strength and conditioning or whatever, sometimes we run into the disordered eating athlete or patient or whatever. How would you go about approaching that, like from our perspective, to like talk to them to getting to a dietitian? Because sometimes you mentioned like there's like that psychological factor.
Yeah. Or would you recommend sending them to sports psych first before they see you?
What would be like the way that someone who is new in the field, who clearly sees like this is a disordered eating patient, how would you go about approaching that conversation?
So that's like a really good question. And I think sports psych should probably be involved. I think initially maybe, and I've had, one of my girlfriends who's a PA and some other physical therapists that I know that have referred to me in the past have just expressed their concern about the particular person's recovery in terms of, if they kind of say, they'll kind of ask some questions about what are you doing for recovery? How are you eating? How are you sleeping? If they're, again, having that holistic approach, and they can kind of get at, and obviously by seeing the patient sometimes, because it's not always visible if they're struggling with food. Mm-hmm. But I think just that initial conversation of like, what are you doing for recovery? This is, nutrition is going to be a really important part of this to get you back out there. And I think especially with, broken bones and stuff like that at a young age, you can kind of insert that, well, maybe talk to a dietitian. Are we getting enough calcium? Are we getting enough protein? Like kind of using basic nutrition knowledge. So from that aspect of like they're coming in for treatment, I think some of those conversations can come up, and you can kind of pitch it as like, let's optimize recovery and let's optimize performance. And if you feel like you're comfortable enough with that person, and they would respond well, it could be, listen, I'm a little bit concerned, based off of X, Y, and Z, maybe something they said to you. How would you feel about maybe speaking to a dietitian? So those are some of the ways that people have done it in the past. And I think it's really depends on how comfortable you feel with that person. And if there is any discomfort in bringing it up at all, it could really just be based off of performance and like, how can we prevent this in the future? Maybe it's a good idea to sit with somebody.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's helpful. And bringing up like that other people should be holistic as well. And I think, that's a factor that, when I'm looking at students or mentoring people, they don't always ask like the sleep questions, the nutrition questions. They get very like tunnel visioned. So that's helpful to kind of chat about for especially newer people coming in the field on our side, is just bring the conversation up early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And just a quick tidbit, because I had this actually happen this year, but for anyone, whether it's like athletic training, physical therapy, strength and conditioning, I think at some point we have to take nutrition 101. By no means does that make us a nutritionist at all, but I always kind of preface it with like, hey, I'm not a nutritionist, but we're doing X, Y, and Z, and like things still aren't getting better, and I would have expected it to get better by now. Like, how's your recovery? Like, are you eating enough? Do you talk to a dietitian? Like things like that. So,
right.
Yeah. That was a really great question. And Adena, that was a really great answer. Thanks for that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
Jumping back into your story a little bit, there were a couple times you really touched on like how grateful you were for your mentors at the time. And they also sound like great bosses, because it sounded like they really empowered you instead of trying to take control of a situation or like shut you down a little bit. So could you maybe touch on a piece of advice or two to our listeners that maybe your mentors gave you that you felt like just really helped you as a clinician?
Yeah, I think the most helpful thing, was just their ability to make me feel I can share ideas, share concerns, be myself. I felt they made me feel so comfortable. And from the get-go, they said, you're a professional. Like, what's your opinion? Or, they've, again, that word empowered, like they really empowered me. They made me feel like I was smart enough, that I was good enough, that I already had the skills. And I think that is so, so important. And, you know, to this day, like they still treat me, they've always treated me as an equal. Like, you are one of the clinicians at this practice, and we're all on the same level here. So obviously they have more experience than me. And a couple of times, you know, they said they're just not so much like fake it till you make it, because I'm not faking my nutrition knowledge, but like in a way, like pretend you've done this before, like act like you've been in this position forever, you know, and just have that confidence. And that was probably the most helpful. It's not even so much the words, but the actions that they demonstrated and the ways that they supported me.
Yeah, I think that speaks volumes. And whether our listener is someone just coming out of school, just entering school, or someone who's been in the field for like 5 years, being able to foster confidence in someone else. So not to go to a tangent, but my boss, he kind of jokes, he's like, I want my legacy to be that I was like a great manager, that I like truly helped people like get better at their craft. And as a younger clinician, I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. And now that I've spent 2 years with him, I'm like, wow, like this is what it's all about. So like the ability to do that in someone younger and who's a little less experienced and a little less confident is really, it's really a gift. So I think 100%. That, yeah, I love the way that you worded all that for the listeners. So thanks.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you're, as a leader of a company or a group or whatever, you want to create a culture. Like you want to foster a culture that learns to create and grows and creates like people who are excited to be in that position versus like micromanaging and stifling and all that sort of thing. So that's amazing that you've had that experience to be able to do all those things. Kind of going into, you'd mentioned like they had always said like, oh, you're a professional and you fake it till you make it, which I love because I think every single profession says that, but we don't want to like say it. Yeah. So many times I've like had a patient walk in the door and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but like, especially at the beginning, but
we've all been there
for sure. Yeah. But anyway, what do you feel like makes like a great dietitian? Like what are the qualities that makes you a great professional in your field?
Yeah, I think really, especially in nutrition, it is ever changing. And, you know, it's a hard field in a way because everybody has to eat. So everybody kind of feels like they're their own expert, you know, like I've tried this, so it's going to work for everybody. Like everybody has their own eating experience. Like I wouldn't, I don't think anyone would say, oh, hey, I'm going to diagnose you with strep throat. But they'll give nutrition advice. Like they kind of cross that, you know, it's like, so it's kind of, you know, I find thinking outside the box, staying on top of research. I think one of the best things you could do as a dietitian is be collaborative and communicative with your team and show them you're an important part of the team. I think that's really just more recent. Like we were always kind of on the end of the totem pole, but we have a lot to offer. So I think it's just kind of stepping in and making yourself, you know, I'm here. These are the things I can do. Yeah. It's a little less about, I've realized with all of these jobs that I've had, it's a little less about the knowledge and, you know, what you know, and more about how you're connecting with people, especially as a dietitian, because nutrition is, yes, it's about the food and maybe the science of food, but there's so many emotional and behavioral components to this, and people have their own relationships with food in their body that I think it's really important to be cognizant of. You know, I remember in my dietetic internship, I was always really bothered in my clinical rotation when one of the older dietitians, she would print up a low salt diet, bring it into this guy that just had this life-altering health scare and say, hey, probably should lose some weight and maybe stop eating deli meat, and like hand him a handout and like walk outside. And I'm like, or, you know, they'd go and they'd fat shame people and like, okay, this is how you're going to lose weight. Like after this person has just been, who the hell knows if it was even related to their weight while they're in the hospital. And I just like would sit there in shock. And then I would also look at like the 15 medications people were taking and prescriptions. And I'm like, why is nobody else looking at this? Like, I would just get so upset. And I think it's like, they just kind of, all right, this is my job. I got to fit these people in, and you know what? They're going to be gone in 2 days, like whatever. And I think for me, I just really cared. And you don't have time for that in the hospital, but I'm kind of going all over the place, but I think putting yourself in your clients or your patient's shoes, and again, having that, I've always had that holistic approach. I understand how sleep affects metabolism. I understand how stress affects metabolism. I understand how stress about eating, if you're too stressed about your diet, can affect things, and maybe we need to loosen the reins. So I think it's just continuing to educate yourself, have empathy, as a nutritionist, and understand that this is more than just food. This is people's cultures. This is people's, again, how they relate to food and how they feel about themselves and their bodies. So I don't know if that answered the question, actually.
No, it does. I think one part of that is kind of the idea of like treating everyone like they're your family. Mm-hmm. And I think if you come into it with that perspective, like you're going to think about it in a holistic perspective, right? Your dad comes in and they're having something wrong medically or hurt. Like, you're going to ask all of those questions because you know them. So why wouldn't you ask those questions to your patient in front of you? So right. I really align with like your holistic view. I think it's so important that we consider how each thing in life relates to either someone's nutrition, someone's pain, whatever it may be. So I think that's a huge thing that you kind of touched on a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think it's just important to note too, asking those questions doesn't mean I'm overstepping boundaries of like what I know how to practice. Like, I will get into deep topics with my clients, but I would never pretend to also be their therapist. Just like I would never give somebody, I've been an athlete my entire life. I would not create a program for somebody. I don't have those credentials. I will always refer out. So I think it's good to ask and then know where to refer out if needed.
Yeah, no, definitely. Transitioning a little bit, because you touched on communication a couple of times again throughout this podcast. So diving into that a little bit, personally, I'm just a little curious as far as maybe like communication goes, or like treatment for you, for the professional guys at the Nets versus Performance 360 where you're at now. Maybe just for like a dietitian coming up in the field, can you just touch on how those are kind of similar and different? Yeah. And I guess too, like how the communication works between the interdisciplinary team.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty similar.
Nice.
A lot of times we'll get together as a performance team on either end, with either group, and we kind of like go down our roster and each have our input so that we're all kind of well aware of what we're working on. We're all sending the same messaging and we're all looking out for the same things. So in that respect, it's very similar. For like specifically my basketball team, I'll sometimes provide like, okay, this is my weekly report of like what I've discussed with all the guys. And then he'll kind of present that to another part. So I'm not always like the direct person unless I feel like there's someone specifically I have to talk to, but he kind of will disseminate that information and we can all discuss as a group if needed. But a lot of it is just sitting down in meetings, jumping on calls, talking with, just keeping everybody in the loop. Just again, I think the most important thing is that you're sending the same messaging. Like if you have, I'm telling the player, okay, you got to make sure you have, this carb source after your game. And then the PT is telling him something different. He's going to lose my trust and maybe even lose the PT's trust. And I think, so I think it's really about making sure you all understand your own philosophy or your goals for that person in order to, we're all here to support the player, the athlete. We have to put their interests for like best interests in there. So that's always top of mind for me. And I, just kind of strive to do that. I've had to do that with, even reflecting back to my private practice, my athletes, and maybe even my eating disorder clients. Like I'm constantly on the phone especially if it's a teenager. the parent, the therapist, maybe the psychiatrist, the doctor, and we are all like initially talking a bunch to get on the same page and make sure we're taking care of this client as best we can. And I think it just, bleeds into every other aspect of collaboration in my jobs.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have two situations that are super similar.
Yeah.
And I know we touch on this, I feel like all the time in our podcast, but Jackie and I also kind of truly believe like this is the way clinics and gyms and professional organizations are going. Because again, at the end of the day, you're just trying to help your athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like it's becoming more, and I'm lucky to be as involved as I am, because again, sometimes the dietitians are just consulting jobs or, just a little like not as involved. And I think it's important. I'm still there giving information, and it's good to be all on the same level.
Yeah, I think what you had kind of touched on kind of goes back to something you said earlier. And that's kind of the idea of like know enough to ask the questions, but also be aware enough to refer out and to have that conversation with a sports dietitian or a psych or whatever. Because I think sometimes too, we get really in it and we want to like know everything and advise on everything. But like, I want to know enough to ask like, okay, I'm seeing your recovery is impaired. What's your nutrition like right now? And they tell me they're, not eating any carbs before. And that's why maybe they're burnt out or fatigued when they're coming in, or they're not healing. So maybe not protein, but I don't know enough to advise like a step further. Right. And we'll get that a lot in our profession. The patients will come in and say like, what supplements should I take? Like what diet should I be on? Or what do you think about this? Yeah. And like, I have thoughts, but I'm not the best person to advise you on that. So I think kind of going back into that multidisciplinary view of like, know enough, but know when you need to refer out, and don't try to act like you know everything. You don't need to do that. So
yeah, no, exactly. I think people get into that mindset, but you really don't have to. And even if it is in your field, you could say, I don't know the answer to that question right now, but I will find out for you. You don't want to just spit out information that you're not sure of, and they'll respect that.
Absolutely. I think admitting when you don't know something is as powerful as knowing something. So I think that's huge. So kind of shifting in a different gear, we kind of like to ask this question for everyone, because everyone coming up in any field has trials, tribulations, obstacles, challenges, whatever you want to call them. Do you have any moments when you kind of saw something as maybe a challenge or an obstacle? And really more importantly, what did you do to kind of get yourself through that? Or what would you advise someone to do to get through it? So whether that's like in the moment of when you move from Long Island to New York and you're kind of in the middle of, I don't know what to do, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, when you're working 3 jobs.
Yeah.
You know what? That like, I don't even know if I just like blacked that out of my memory.
Like, sorry if we brought it back up.
Yeah. I mean, technically that's the funny thing with nutrition. I mean, I know a lot of other dietitians in my kind of anyone in my positions are also doing other things. So, still technically doing 3 jobs, but they're all like, I love all of them, and they make me happy. So I don't mind it. But I kind of actually just totally forgot the question. We're going back to
what are some things that you did to like get through some challenges and some obstacles?
So I've had to learn to do this because I was never good at it, and I'm still getting better at it, but asking for a little bit of help. Especially I think with the whole situation with the corporate wellness thing and going to my bosses for that, and but being able to go to them for any questions that I might have with particular client cases or business things or anything. So just asking for help and kind of talking it out with somebody. A lot of this for me, especially for example, like the move, or even just like going downtown to start with this P360 thing. I was running a lot of pros and cons through my head. I was always looking for where is the growth, where is the potential. And a lot of times I would just kind of intuitively feel it in my gut, honestly, like when I just kind of quiet all the noise and really thought about my decision or the question that I had and kind of sat with it for a little bit, maybe journal on it and, whatever I had to do for, to kind of get to that place. But a lot of these things were gut feelings, to be honest. And that seems to have worked for me. I don't know, it's kind of like not the best advice because I don't think it works for everybody, but, I think a lot, I plan a lot, I like lists, I like journaling. And, I think a combination of those things, not very scientific or helpful maybe, but that's how I've kind of always come to my decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the note of like intuition, I think that's still good advice because I think you said a really nice thing. And that's like the moment you quiet the noise, right? Like anyone coming up in the field, there's always like, well, what if I can't do this? Or what if this goes wrong? Or And like, we start going in these like webs of confusion and chaos and things like that. But sometimes you have to find something to quiet the noise. So although maybe it sounds a little bit more abstract, it's just like follow your gut. And people are like, well, what does that even mean? Right. You also said quiet the noise. And maybe that one's more a concrete thing for people to do. And whether that's, mindfulness or journaling or create some lists and start striking them off, which I love to do. One of those people that'll like, I'll write this down so I can cross it off. There's satisfaction in that. And, I think that's still a really good piece of advice for someone. So that's great.
And also I'm glad that you touched on asking for help. I have a hard time with that too. And again, like you said,
definitely do.
Yeah. And like you said, it's something you have to learn. Cause like growing up, if you go through however many years where you feel like I can do this, I don't need help. And then you get to a position where you're like, yeah, I can do this, but it'll be a lot better if I maybe ask one or two people to just kind of help me along and things I don't really know. So I think that's also a really great piece of advice for whether you're younger or a little bit older in the field.
Yeah, we all need help. Everybody needs a mentor.
Yeah. And I know, especially with strength and conditioning and physical therapy and athletic training, sometimes we don't know the resources to go to find maybe sports dietitians. So I guess we'll start with like, where can people find you maybe if they want to reach out to you, if you're comfortable with that? And then if not, or also like, where can we find sports dietitians? What's a good resource maybe?
It's so funny. There was actually in my sports dietitian listserv, somebody was asking that same question. Like, how is there a resource? And I'm gonna have to get back to you on that because I think there was an answer and somebody had a site to go to, and maybe, I don't know if you guys do show notes or something, but maybe I can get that back to you.
Yeah. No rush.
Yeah. So, I mean, me personally, I have been kind of quiet on social media since all of this started. It is an easy way to find me though. It's just my name, Adena, ADENA _Neglia at NEGLIA. So you can find me on there. I started this account having to keep a lot of my eating disorder clients in mind. So it is a lot on my philosophy based on kind of disordered eating and eating disorders and just fostering a healthy relationship with food in your body, which I think applies to everybody anyway. So that's where I am there. Probably the best way, honestly, to reach me. My website is linked in there. I occasionally blog on there. It started off as a recipe blog and then just kind of developed into more of a every once in a while blog post sort of thing as I got busy. Nutrition by Adena, and there's like a way to contact me on there. So those are probably two of the best ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I know we appreciate it. I know our listeners definitely appreciate it. And you definitely mentioned a lot of things that I think people will be able to use in their practice who are not just sports dietitians, but also too sports dietitians coming up in the field, gives them some things to think about, which is awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I do hope it was helpful.
Yes, absolutely was. Thank you, Adena.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Women Leaders in Sports Medicine podcast. This podcast is for you to take a step closer to your dreams. Visit www.womenleadersinsportsmedicine.com to join our roundtables, learn about our mentorship programs, and to let us know what you want to hear. Have a great day, and remember, it's your time to lead.